Vasquez, and I will be helping to facilitate this conversation tonight. We have plenty of food back there, so don't be shy and keep on grabbing as much food as you guys need. Bathrooms are just past these doors for those who need to use the facilities. Just a quick process for tonight on what to expect. We are planning on being together for the next hour and a half, so 7:30, that's when we're scheduled to wrap it up. If we finish early, we finish early, but we are scheduled to be here till 7:30. So the purpose of tonight's community listening session is to hear your guys' input and feedback regarding the proposed recommendations that the Governor's Council on Law Enforcement and Community Relations has put together, and I will let James Burrows from the Governor's Office explain a little bit more about what that council is doing and what the setup and all of that. So he'll do a quick introduction, and then I will just kind of do a quick setup of what to expect tonight. And then basically it's really more of just like a listening of what you guys think about the recommendations. We have some questions to kind of start the conversation. We don't have to focus on those questions, but it's just questions to kind of help you guys get that conversation going. So with that, I'll turn it over to James Burrows. Again, he's the Governor's Office, and he'll give us a quick update on what the council is, who they are, and what the purpose of it is.
Thank you. First of all, good evening. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is James Burrows. I'm the Chief Inclusion Officer. I work out of the Governor's Office for Governor Mark Dayton. My role in the Governor's Office is to make Minnesota a more equitable state. So as far as employment, diversifying our employment rates, as far as how we spend our money, spending it with minority-owned, women-owned businesses, but also to engage in community in different ways. As part of that, though, as well, when the shooting happened with Philando Castile, being part of the governor's senior leadership team, and also Commissioner Lindsay, who's our Human Rights Commissioner for the state as well, we were part of a team meeting with the governor talking about what can we do differently so things like this don't happen in the future. It was less about right or wrong or guilt or innocence of the officer, but how do we prevent these things from happening. Part of that came out of that was the creation of this Governor's Council on Law Enforcement and Community Relations. The council is made up of 32 members, 15 voting members, and 17 ex officio members. We have a copy of the executive order for you, so I won't go through that entire list, but on the second page of that executive order, it gives you all the list of members of the council. As you can see, it's a mix of law enforcement and community, but it also has on there people who had relatives who were victims of some of these shootings. Jamar Clark's mother is a part of the council, and then Clarence Castile, who's the uncle of Philando Castile, is a part of the council as well. The council was set up to do many different things, and I won't repeat what's in the executive order, but mainly to see how can we come to a common ground on some recommendations that we can help change the trajectory of police and community relations. We know we can't solve it all in one council. I want to say that the city of Falcon Heights had their own separate council as well. I think other districts, maybe even Duluth, have had some things around this discussion around this particular work. But we wanted to make sure that we got these recommendations to the governor, to the legislature, and see what we can do differently. To that end, the council has been in existence since October of last year, and we're going to end September 29th, will be the last day of the council. We've had to this point 3 community meetings. This will be the 4th. We've had them in St. Paul, Minneapolis, and I'm missing a place. Where was the other one? Augsburg College, so double up in St. Paul. No, just Minneapolis, right? From the border, Minneapolis as well. And we've also had meetings with different community groups that are separate from those meetings. So the governor has met with police chiefs, he's met with the NAACP, he's met with other community members around what can be done differently. Part of tonight's meeting is to share with you the preliminary recommendations, which you should have a copy of. And also to have Ruben, who's our engagement person here, kind of engage you in a discussion about some of the things that are happening, either with the recommendations that you see there or things that you want to have addressed as well. The goal of this is twofold. One is to hear your input and feedback and make sure that gets back to the council. The council is set up in different committees, and the committees are listed in the executive order as well to make sure they get back to the appropriate committee. And then also, too, the council can discuss how that could be incorporated or if that would be incorporated into their final recommendations. The final recommendations, as I said before, will go to the governor and the legislature. From there, there'll be things that from an executive standpoint we can do in the governor's office. From a legislative standpoint, laws change we recommended. And then from a local standpoint, as far as what police can do locally. We will publish those recommendations, so they will be statewide, public and available to everyone. And the work then starts in earnest after that. One of the things that you can have a recommendation, but if it sits on the shelf and nothing is done with it, it's just not a recommendation. But we want to say, how do we empower community and law enforcement to work collectively together going forward to implement some of these things? So I won't take up much more of your time on that. I just want to give you an overview of how we got here. Today's session is about more listening to you. And if you do have questions, I'll jump back up here and answer those questions as well. The other piece I'll say is on behalf of the governor and Governor Dayton and Lieutenant Governor Tina Smith, they really appreciate the feedback they're getting from community. One of the things that the governor prides himself on is making sure that all Minnesotans are heard and their voice is heard at the table. And not only just heard, but it's accounted for in how we do our work for all Minnesotans. So on their behalf, I want to thank you for being here today as well. And it's an intimate group, so please don't be bashful, don't be shy. Get as much food as you can. We paid for it, so take it home if you need to as well. Just have a good time. I'll turn it back over to Ruben.
Thank you, James. So, as James said, the preliminary recommendations are at the table over there. If you have not had a chance to pick them up, either pick them up or let us know and we'll bring them to you, and as well as the executive order establishing the council. Just before we kind of start digging into the meat and bones of the recommendations and getting your guys' input, I do want to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as setting some level of expectations for this conversation. We want to hear your input, and we also want to be respectful of everybody's input. I think it's important that we are all on the same page as far as we're not all going to agree on every single thing that is said from each other. We're not asking for that, but what we are asking for is to respect each other's input. So just because you don't agree with what somebody else is saying, doesn't mean that you have the right to jump in and interrupt them or cut them off or tell them to sit down. So we're asking for everybody kind of to respect everybody's, where they're coming from. We are asking, although I don't think it's going to be an issue with this size of a group, but we are kind of asking for you to kind of keep your comments, ideas to about 3 to 5 minutes, just so that we give everybody a chance to speak. But like I said, I don't think that with this size of a group, that's going to be an issue. Your recommendations, just so that everybody knows, obviously not every single recommendation that the council is going to hear, that the governor is going to hear, is going to make it into the final product. So I just want to set that expectation because at the end, people, I'm sure, will come and say, well, I recommended this and I don't see it, right? It's just not realistic. So just be aware that your input is being heard. Tonight's meeting is being recorded, and we also have somebody taking notes. At the end of this meeting, what I will do as a facilitator is I will also do a summary of what this meeting was about and what happened, the conversations, and then that summary also gets uploaded onto the Facebook page along with the video. If you're interested in seeing what has occurred at the other community listening sessions, those videos, those summaries are also uploaded on the Facebook page. So if you want to take a look, you're welcome to do so. So again, we have 3 questions that we want to just kind of use to kind of get the conversation started. Those are not the only questions. In my experience with these meetings is that as conversation starts, other questions start coming up. So with that, are there any questions before we kind of start digging into this and start hearing from you guys? Okay.
I just wanted to say, just because it's a small group and we're heading to another meeting and I didn't want to feel impolite when we get up and leave, and I just wanted to say sorry.
Thank you. So, have everybody had a chance to look at the recommendations? The recommendations have been posted to the website. They were posted a few weeks ago. Yeah, for a while, for about a month. So to give community members an opportunity to read them ahead of time. But like I said, we also have them here. Does everybody feel like they've had some time to look, to kind of understand somewhat of what some of those recommendations are? The other thing I want to make clear is that these are the original recommendations from the council. The reason I'm saying that is because at other meetings, what the question that has been asked is, as you're having these conversations with community, do the recommendations get updated? The answer is no, because we want everybody to kind of start from the same playing field. So these are the original preliminary recommendations from the council. The idea is that once all the listening sessions are completed and the conversations that the governor has been having with people throughout the community, everything will be brought back to the council, and then that's when the council really starts kind of incorporating some of these recommendations, updating the recommendations that they have in front of them to finalize the product for the governor. So with that, first question that we have is just in general, what are your thoughts about the recommendations? And even if you disagree with them, that's okay. We need to hear all the good stuff as well as all the not so good stuff. Anybody?
I like that it mentions transparency and admitting when you make a mistake.
Admitting what?
Like when the police force makes a mistake, that they need to come out and talk about it.
So say more about transparency. You say you like the way.
I just appreciate that they included it there.
Okay. Why is that important for you?
Because it should be recognized and they should take responsibility and move forward and not do
They
it.
said
and
they
not
should
do
take
it.
responsibility?
Yeah,
And
well,
who's they?
I think it's referring to
Okay.
the police.
Okay.
So, police department,
Okay.
take responsibility and move forward and try not to do whatever it was. Other thing.
Okay.
I like that it's coming from the 21st century President's Task Force. I like how that task force work has been done. I sit on a citizen review board, so I see some of this, and the transparency stuff is really important. Peace officer language, the framework of people of color, Native people kind of thing. That whole model of community policing, I definitely dig it. I have to read some more of it, but if it's something closer to the 21st century community policing, we do community policing here, so we're pretty into it, pretty deep into it.
Anybody else? Thoughts? Concerns about some of these recommendations?
I have concerns that some of them don't go far enough. I think Renee made a really good point about how the task force on 21st century policing laid out a number of really critical steps. And I see a lot of good work in here, and I want to acknowledge the tremendous amount of time and effort that went into it. And I think there's certainly some good steps forward here, but at the same time, I wonder if they're enough. So for example, on the criminal justice and social justice reform work group, 21 is to conduct data collection. And I think that's something that we're looking forward to here in Duluth as well. And I would hope that that would be publicly released. And I'm not seeing like a specific schedule for when that would happen or if it would happen. So I'd be wondering if that that aggregated data in terms of the racial breakdown of stops and so on would be released regularly and posted so people could look at it. Point number 2, including a special prosecutor in police investigations as a partner to the county attorney, but not a replacement. I think this is a good example of a positive step that doesn't go far enough. We saw, for instance, with Hennepin County, where in Minneapolis, where Mike Freeman has overseen the investigations and the potential prosecutions of police shootings now for 2 decades, basically, and has never brought charges. And it's hard for a county attorney who works very closely with police, just because of the nature of their job, to have the oversight position. So I would think that the special prosecutor really should be a state level position and should be tasked with handling all police shootings, and should be independent of the local system in a way that the county attorney simply can't be. I think that the police training work group has some really nice ideas around more CIT type training and including implicit bias, and I know that this is something that the community really pushed for. I think a lot of credit has to go to activist groups for this being in there, but again, I wonder about the specifics. I see something about flexibility in the methods used. I see fair and impartial policing, and it's supposed to include implicit bias, but I don't know for sure like what that would look like. So I just have concerns about exactly how that would be implemented. Like, for instance, is it going to be the case that every officer gets the 40-hour CIT course that we're trying to work towards here in Duluth? I think that would be a good goal, but I don't see that in here. So I would like that, for example. And then
So more specifics on what each of these
right.
means.
Right, and then on the nature of transparency, I think I want to echo that this is a really important piece, and with respect to the limits of the sort of scope and power of this effort, I think that we have to say that this really hasn't happened to date, and it's not clear to me that simply because it's stated that mistakes should be acknowledged and admitted and apologized for, it's not clear to me that that's actually going to happen. And I think you really need to change a lot of the culture that's built up within police departments. And when you have police unions led by somebody like Bob Kroll, for example, who has a troubling history, I don't see a lot of cause for optimism. When you have, right around the same time as this work is taking place, the Post Board was considering a request to rename the training fund in honor of Philando Castile, and that was something that Governor Dayton, and I really want to credit him for this, pushed for publicly. He stepped out on a limb there, and there was pushback from police unions, and the Post Board overwhelmingly rejected naming the fund after Philando Castile, and I thought that was really discouraging and kind of a slap in the face of these kinds of efforts, because how are we supposed to have trust that there's going to be a step forward when the people who are in charge of setting the standards are saying so clearly that they don't want them associated with one of the most prominent victims, a totally innocent person who was gunned down in a traffic stop. So I see a lot of really good stuff here, and I also see ways that it could go farther, and then I question, I guess I'm hoping that the follow-through will be effective, but I'm concerned.
What does the follow-through look like for you? What would that look like?
I think it would involve putting some real teeth into some of these recommendations and some real civilian oversight. So Renee mentioned the review panel. I think that's a great example of something where there can be a partnership between police and the community, and I think we should give those panels more authority. That might require changing state laws, changing local laws, renegotiating contracts with police unions, so it's not a tiny thing.
Right.
I think that that's something where then you can start to see some changes really happen.
I think too, to add to that, the legislation law about CRB strength, there's, I don't know, so from my understanding, our CRB citizen boards in Minnesota, their strength isn't as strong because legislation doesn't have it in place or whatever it is. So that's frustration for community members on the ground when we can't decide something or help decide something because we don't have the teeth to do it, back to that. And then it invalidates the whole CRB dream because we don't have the support. And then this all takes money, all of this, the community policing, and you know that. But to do all this work takes money and support, and I hope that this is what this work is about, is getting money to the state so that we can support this model or the police work and stuff that we need to do for the community members. So there's just a bunch of stuff for lots of dots.
So the CRB, you could, if I heard both of you guys correctly, is give the CRB more authority, right? Not just
Just a name,
in name, but
Yeah.
also give them
Yeah.
more teeth to, I
Yeah.
think you said,
Yep.
give them more teeth.
right?
Okay. And then going back to, I think it was your recommendation regarding data. You had mentioned something about you wanted to see more specifics on data as far as when information is going to get released. Is that correct?
For instance, like say that it will be released annually on the
Okay.
website of the department.
So more specifics on
Yeah.
how and when that information is going to get released.
Right.
Okay. What else?
I have to leave to babysit at 6:30, so I just wanted to, I'm with Community Action, and we have really noticed, we do a lot of work around helping people get driver's licenses, donated cars, car loans, you know, transportation is a big thing. And it's kind of tangentially in here, but not in here, about one way to improve community relations and law enforcement is to stop the practice, which is in this neighborhood, of unmarked police pulling over people who they have pulled over before, who they know don't have insurance, and it's over and over and over again, or the tail light thing, or the whole Philando. I mean, he was pulled over how many times in a short number of years? And it's like, it's harassment, really, when you think about it. And I don't know what recommendation it fits into or doesn't fit into, but that's a big part of police community relations, is to stop harassing people. I don't know any other way to say it, so.
So you said something about the unmarked police vehicles, which kind of touches a little bit more on the transparency part, right?
Yeah,
Because it's like, why do they need to be an unmarked
right.
versus a marked police car?
Yes, right. Well, I mean, I get the feeling sometimes they're unmarked and, you know, they're on certain corners where, you know, they probably have reason to believe that there's dealers or drugs happening. But, oh, by the way, they're also just using it for all these traffic stops. So maybe that's why they're unmarked. I don't know, but there's just a big unmarked presence in this neighborhood specifically, and maybe in other neighborhoods too, but where people are constantly, including people who work with, you know, work for community action, or people coming in who, you know, need services or whatever, but there's just this pattern of pulling people over for all kinds of very small things, and then it causes these huge problems in people's lives, right? I mean, people end up in jail and losing their jobs, and, you know, it just escalates from being criminalized. So I don't know, I just wanted to throw that out there before I had to go. Thank you.
Did you have something? Did you have something? Oh. So, welcome, sir. Welcome. It does what's there makes sense. You know, I've heard tonight, and I've heard at other meetings, like more, I think somebody called it more teeth, more specifics, and also we're just trying to figure what that might look like. So, how do you see these recommendations fitting into your community up here in Duluth area? They work up here. Some of these recommendations work up here.
Have you talked to people up here? Are people from up here on your task force?
Please, do you know? I don't know the answer to that question. Are people from or the northern part of the
32.
Yeah.
I don't think we have anyone from this particular area. What we tried to do in putting together the task force was identify agencies as opposed to people. So sometimes task forces are put together by saying, hey, I want that individual in the task force. What we did was we said, hey, we want the NAACP from Rochester, Duluth, St. Paul, Minneapolis to have a representation. We want The Police Chief Association have a representation, the Sheriff Association, so we didn't pick people in individual areas. We did select as a co-chair, though, Scott Johnson, who's the Chief of Police in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, because we wanted to understand, folks, everybody understand that this is not just a Metro Twin Cities issue. It's an
Right.
issue throughout the
My point,
state.
exactly.
Throughout the state. So part of the reason we're here today is that as well. So we do have a few people like Scott and others that are part of it, but it's more so about organization and who the organization
You
is.
got Native representation,
We
American
do, we do.
representation?
We have, blanking on his name. Who?
Roger Smith.
Roger Smith, is part of this as well. And we've also spoken with a lot of the tribes as well, around this work as well.
Yeah.
Who from the NAACP in Duluth is represented?
In Duluth, I can't say anybody, but the current representative that the NAACP selected was Yusuf Mjini. Before that, like his name was W.C. Jordan. The W.C. Jordan was representing the NAACP.
From the state conference.
Yep, state conference. He then turned his responsibility over to Yusuf about 2 or 3 meetings ago because of his schedule. We've also individually met with the Minneapolis and St. Paul NAACP. We have not met with Duluth. I am open to that idea though, so I would love to talk to my information.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm not too familiar with exactly what's going on. I'm not from here, but I've been living in Duluth about a year. But just kind of like looking over what is recommended, I don't think it's good to give power to certain representatives individually, but rather focus on hiring the bar for police officers. Like more education, there should be more diversity, there should be different cultures, you know, there shouldn't be 2 police officers riding together with the same background. Mix them up more, as far as everywhere, not just focusing in, you know, on certain stereotype neighborhoods. And definitely shouldn't be given anything to council members or representatives because that's just putting too much power in, you know, civilians over civilians, which wouldn't help with the problem. So just focusing on education with the police officers. Higher standards, not just 18 and no criminal background. You need to have at least a 4-year degree. You know, have some kind of life experience behind you, be in shape.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I really like that point about specifically increasing the diversity of police forces, and I see some recommendations in here that could be helpful for that, including, like was mentioned, taking into account life experience and having alternate pathways for people to get on the police force. And I know that former Chief Gordon Ramsay was looking at ways to tweak the selection criteria, if you will, to try to increase that. And I presume that's ongoing.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I know that the Duluth police force, I mean, I've heard it argued that it's representative in terms of the percentages of the officers, but I would say that there's a lot of room to increase the diversity of the Duluth police force. And certainly if you look at like Minneapolis or something, these are all, they're overwhelmingly officers who don't live in the city, who don't look like the communities they police, and of course that leads to problems. They demonstrate with their actions that oftentimes they have contempt for the communities that they're supposed to be serving. So you need more people who live in those communities, who know those communities, also being part of the police force, for sure. So I like that point.
And then when you guys were talking about diversity, you're talking about race and ethnicity, or was it broader than that?
Yeah, like cultural background more so, and just kind of what he stated, just being in the community or having grown up in that community, or, you know, just not a stranger, or at least if a stranger, at least have some kind of more cultural awareness to openness to knowing, getting to know the community.
Gender too. It'd be nice to have more women on the
Well,
police force.
okay.
It's a recruiting issue. Oh, that's recruiting.
For everything is diversity.
Just in line with what you were saying, I've long had a concern. First of all, my name is Claudia Washington, and past president of the Minnesota Dakota State Conference, NAACP, and currently vice president of state conference, as well as vice president of local branch. But been involved, first of all, police, community relations, try to get it established far back to the 70s. We moved to the 80s, 90s, and probably 2000 we finally got it implemented here in Duluth. But the concern was a lot of the recruitment for law enforcement come out of outstate or rural America, which have very limited contact with people of color, and often very difficult to change attitudes that they grew up with. And so I wonder how much our police department, scrutinize people from those areas. I mean, everybody got a canned answer. Yeah, I don't believe you go to school to be a police officer. They don't teach you how to do interviews. So everybody know how to get to the interview. I was curious about how deep do police departments go in terms of screening police officers before they hire them.
I don't know the answer to that question.
And so my concern is, haven't got through this in terms of recommendations. I'm curious whether anyone else has addressed that issue. I thought I heard it from here.
So one of the things that we were able to do is Matt Bostrom, who used to be the Ramsey County Sheriff, had done a lot of work on character-based hiring. So the short version of that is, it's not just what's on the paper, how well you shoot a gun, your military background. It's about what's that character, what those issues are going to come up when it's you got to choose between the right thing and the wrong thing to do, how that's going to happen. We actually had a presentation the council did of that entire team. So Matt's no longer there, but the current Ramsey County Sheriff led a complete hiring team. So how they hire has led to a lot more diversity in officers. Not just diversity in racial and culture, but also too just how they think about things. One of the things that was eliminating people from early on was background checks around credit or background checks around financial issues. What they looked at was the circumstance rather than just, okay, you got a bad credit rating, that's going to have you be disqualified. But what's the circumstance around that? Maybe you're doing things, working 2 jobs, other things like that, and ask that deeper question. So the council got about a 2-hour presentation from them and considered that as part of a model, as putting it in as far as the recruiting and the interview process. By no means is it complete, but one of the things that we heard a lot about was you can just say a lot about recruiting for diversity, but you got to change the system about how it's done, and the Ramsey County Sheriff's been kind of the model of that. That work is also too been copied nationally as well, and actually some of the local police forces are doing something around that. So the committee itself, it's the Recruiting and Diversity Committee that's part of the council, took that into consideration. The entire council heard from that.
Okay. We know that in most cases where African Americans have been killed, is that people say that they fear for their lives. And I believe that's a cultural thing that has a lot to do with your image of black people. So I'm curious about, is there any way that anyone has identified a way to address that issue? That fear, which is, no matter why that fear is there, it's a legitimate reason to use deadly force. And so that's what, back in my mind, how do we address that issue from the council? I mean, how do you dig deeper and talk about making any recommendations as to where, how to address that issue?
Yeah, so one of the things that came up, and by no means when having this session, I'm not trying to answer the questions, I'm trying to give you some information about what we did talk about. That came out wrong. I don't mean to completely answer the question, just give you the information. But the procedural justice implicit bias training that's mentioned in the recommendations, there was $6 million this year passed in the legislature that's going to go to the post board, which is the information you're talking about in the Philando-Castile bill that they wanted to name after Philando, but wasn't. That $6 million will go towards things like implicit bias training, procedural justice, cultural competency. And that particular training, it won't eliminate that mindset of officers. I'm not going to say it's going to eliminate somebody being afraid of an African-American man, but we hope to change some of that philosophy and that culture by some of that training. Now, that training is going to be implemented by what's called the Post Board, the Police Officer Standards Training Board, and it's going to look differently at each particular police agency. So one of the things that I would suggest to the community and others is, how do we have a more substantive relationship with the Post Board as far as what that training can look like, how it's designed, who's working on it? Because right now, each individual police agency does it the way they want to. They get the money, they do the training how they want to. So there's no set standard on what it looks like. But one of the things that they want to do is work on that particular issue to address some of those implicit or explicit biases that you talked about.
And last thing, I'm concerned about whether anyone has created any kind of psychological evaluation that would get at the root of some of those kind of issues. I mean, if they haven't been done, that may be something that we can have a commission have a study done as the psych department work on developing a tool to make that kind of assessment. It may not be out there, but to me, that's worth pursuing. Okay.
So there was implicit bias training already done, and then the board recommends to do it, we could do it again. And so, just question, we are doing implicit bias here. We've already done one section of it. So there's gonna be another section of that, but, so if this goes forward, kind of everybody will do it? Is that what I'm hearing?
So, yes, that's the goal. So let me say that. So the money that was given to the Post Board, $6 million, includes cultural competency training, implicit bias, procedural justice. That money is given to the Post Board, but each individual officer agency, let's say the Duluth Police, would apply for resources to do training around that area. So they would design the training locally, and they would do it. Now, I'd be naive to say that, tell you that all officers in the state of Minnesota are going to make sure that they go through all of that training. That's the goal. But that $6 million is not going to train all the 10,000 officers. So we start there, but maybe one of the recommendations, we need to get more resource from the legislature so all officers can be trained in that. And it's not just a one-time training. It's something that happens every year on a regular basis, and it becomes part of, as you're trained in the police academy as an officer, you get that training. When you become an officer, you get the training as well. I hope that answers your question.
I know it wasn't cheap, like when we were doing it, it's not cheap at all. And then training budget for us dwindled last year, so that alarms me a lot. But, that's all I have to that.
Was the police department invited to this? The Duluth Police Department?
To the specific meeting?
Just curious.
Not directly, right? No, not directly.
Is there a reason why?
Well, we have, so all the community meetings, we've never reached out directly to the police officers themselves. We actually partner with NAACP, Community Action, other agencies to get the word out. Some of our meetings, police have come to those meetings, but we've never necessarily, not to say that we couldn't in the future, directly went and said, hey, police officers, come to this meeting. We have had meetings, the governor has, with chiefs of police from different police agencies throughout the state, and gotten that input and feedback too. We've never directly reached out and said, hey, come to the community meeting, which is something we could consider in the future.
And they've received these recommendations?
The local police?
Yeah, the police chiefs?
Police Chief Association, yes, the Police Chief Association chairperson, all Police Chief Association, is part of the council.
Okay.
They haven't received the recommendations yet because they're still draft recommendations.
Okay.
They'll receive the final ones through the Police Chief Association.
Or add? I know we talked a little bit about training and diversity. What about health and wellness recommendations? Anything there?
We do that, we recommend that here in our department. I'm not sure if everybody does it everywhere, but we have a standard, what police officers have access to here. They have all these things that you talked about, pretty much a lot of them here.
So you're saying here there's a limit on what they have access to?
No, I'm saying that these things they have access to health, they have access to
Uh-huh.
talking to somebody about
Oh,
trauma,
oh,
they
I
have
see, I
access
see.
to all that stuff here already.
Okay. Anything else on that area? Or any other area, actually? We talked a little bit about the social justice, criminal and social justice. Anything else in that area that anybody else wants to add? Some of the things that have come up is obviously more specifics on data, like when, how, that kind of stuff, money. It sounds like money is also the other thing that has come up, like how much is some of these things going to cost. So more specifics on data, money, anything else that you guys think needs to be included in this.
Is there gonna be like a bigger, you're gonna have this group going forward, statewide, right? Is there gonna be like a report back or some kind of relationship with each other? Because it sounds like it was, this whole group was already designed and put together and you're ending in September or something. Is there gonna be like a report back to the state later on and everywhere, kind of? I know that
Just to
sounds.
see how things are going?
Just to kind of
after they're
update and keep
implemented?
those relationships strong, not just down there, but everywhere. And kind of just having a conversation everywhere to how to strengthen this constantly. And then like citizen police academy kind of things where the citizens can actually train and learn. We have that and we do it here, but I don't know how that integrates at all. So that people can feel be a part of what police really learn and graduate with this certificate and all these cool things. And so that the police and the community really are at the table together having conversations about what happens on our streets, kind of thing.
Okay, so I don't think there is a group that has been put together to kind of do follow-up. If I'm hearing you correctly, that's what that's
Ongoing, kind of, yeah,
so maybe that's one of the recommendations,
yeah.
is put something together to kind of make sure that the final recommendations are being looked at, they're being followed, type of thing.
Yeah, not
That-
just today, but 7 generations ahead, like always, so that it's always in the makeup of our state, of how we do things.
And what
here.
would that group look like? I mean,
It
what?
could be like offset of who these folks already are, and then grab different people that you missed that first time around,
Okay.
and get different people at the table doing different work, and then coming together as a big state model, so that it's really important in a big way that legislation pays attention to what community wants, or what the ground, or what grassroots people really want in their policing or safety or public safety. So kind of thinking outside the box more, not so many squares in that circle, kind of thing.
So it kind of falls under accountability, right? How
Right,
do we keep
yeah.
all this?
Yeah, yeah.
How do we keep everybody accountable to these things?
Correct.
After the council is done at the end of September?
Yep.
Okay. And James, there's nothing set in place for after that, right?
No,
So,
I mean,
okay.
part of the recommendation that I'm here for you is how do we sustain the work?
Right.
And that's a good point, we can help implement those things, sustain the work. One of the recommendations we've had from other people is that also, although this council will end on September 29th, there are a lot of standing government councils around work. There's a workforce council, there's other stuff, and we need a community police relations council that's a standing council that will go on to do this work in a more integrated way throughout
Yeah.
the state. So that's something we can definitely take back.
I love that, that'd be great.
Okay. Do we know if that exists up here?
For the CRB work, we kind of take it on ourselves and we do some of that work. More collective kind of, it's not really official kind of work, so.
Okay.
But I'd love to be part of designing that if you would have me, so I'm fully on board of helping this process.
To that point, make sure everyone signs in, leaves like an email information. We'll make sure you'll get in contact with you as this board continues.
Okay. What else? And I know some of you guys came in late, so I want to give you guys some time to kind of take a look at the recommendations. But basically what we're just doing a quick check-in on what you guys think about the recommendations, the proposed recommendations, what it works, what's missing, how do they fit into the community up here.
For the police training, I presume those standards, if they're mandated training, will be set by the post board. Can you tell us who's on the post board right now in terms of how many are ex-officers and how many are civilians? And what sort of training the post board gets itself?
James, do we know that? I don't know.
My impression is mostly ex-police officers and not that many civilians. And I don't know at all like what sort of training they themselves receive.
So is one of your recommendations to take a look at that? What that might look like?
I guess if we're talking about accountability and oversight and civilian involvement in the process, that should also extend to the post board itself. I would think.
Okay.
Just thought this came to me. There are agencies that require mandatory reporting. Why not make it mandatory reporting that police officers report any deviation that they witness of violation of the policy, as well as violating people's rights, that they are required to report it. First of all, they train what they are, but they're required to report it, separate from many other incident, separate from the incident report that they're responding to. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like
So mandatory reporting of
any violation
by other
right,
law enforcement, that's what you're saying.
right, officer.
Yeah. Okay.
And so if there's consequences for not divulging that, because we've heard for years about the blue code, and there are consequences if they don't follow it, because you know the word is I think one of the biggest violations probably was New York, where they had people if you didn't support whatever was going on, they have a way of putting you in harm's way or maybe even taking you out. So, but my point is, those officers not just required, but also give them some protection, almost like what they call it, for lack of the word I want to use, is snitching.
Whistleblower.
Snitching. Snitch. That's another word for where people report violation of policy and laws and corporations. So why not have the same kind of, because there are too many consequences for police officers who speak up. So that's
So putting something in place that allows officers
require them to, and also
manage
protection when they
do. Okay, that's good. I think we've actually also heard that from other community sessions, so that's good.
The recommendation number 5 on the workplace policy oversight, diversity, recruitment, retention work group.
Number 5, okay.
Yeah, it talks about, law enforcement, and the communities they serve, improving those interactions and being more involved and all that kind of stuff. And I have a good example of how, when that works well. Gabby and I used to work at the University of Wisconsin Superior, just across the bridge in Superior, Wisconsin. And a few years ago, the Black Student Union at the university, which I was the advisor to, invited the local police chief and officers and the police chief here at the time to be part of a program called It's Time We Talked. Police Interactions, It's Time We Talked. And they both signed on, they both had officers there, both came to the event. And since that program, it's been a back and forth kind of relationship, and it's building and it's positive, and the officers come to the Black Student Union events and vice versa, and they can see the commitment by these officers that do come consistently, by the police chief, that kind of thing. And just recently, last May, the Black Student Union members presented the police chief in Superior with a traditional African kente, and made national news, made USA Today news over that. But they wanted to honor him for that commitment to them and being so involved, and I just think that maybe because it kind of gives an example of maybe working at a soup kitchen or whatever, but reaching out to the communities, like the student organizations at colleges, college campuses and stuff like that, Native student organizations and Hispanic student organizations, Black student unions, and to build that relationship.
Do you think there needs to be more specifics to that? I mean, aside from saying law enforcement needs to reach out to, student organizations.
What do you mean?
Well, like, attend X number of events, or participate in this, or just more broader of like, be more engaged. Because I think this talks a little bit about just be more engaged in the community to build those relationships.
I think the example of the student organization is not in here, and I think it's a good one. I also served as a faculty advisor for a group at Scholastica, and Chief Tuscan came and sat on a panel along with some local community activists, plus somebody from Minneapolis, Black Lives Matter, and it was a good discussion. So I think specifically saying student groups is a really good point that could be added.
Student organizations, okay.
That's embedded in our community policing model here. Like, you gotta get out of your car, talk to those kids, talk to everybody. We actively do that here. I don't know if it needs to be laid out. Is the whole state community policing model? So if that's not what the whole state is, then I don't know if we could lay it out. But it works. We're doing good work here for our community police in our model, and not perfect or anything, nothing's ever, but our emphasis when we hire police officers is to understand what community policing is and what you know about 21st century policing. And if they don't know enough about it, it's more work to get them through. I've been on panels to hire and what specifically is looked for in hiring.
Okay. Anything else? Do you guys see anything else in any other of the sections that we have not talked about? That needs to change, or we have to add to it? Not enough is said, too much is said, anything like that?
Is it getting too far into the weeds to ask about how you report on an officer in the agency? Is that getting too into the weeds about how you report an officer's misbehaving, so as a citizen I could file a report? Is that too weedy language? Complaint process.
To put more of a complaint process in it?
Is that in, I didn't read it, I don't know
Is
if
that under
that's,
6.1 maybe?
is it in there?
Maybe,
Okay.
maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. But complaining about and getting that looked at is a process. We're working on that too now. How to receive and the data for complaints against policemen or police people in general. 6.
I think it's an issue in Minneapolis where they were like turning people away to supposedly at the wrong precinct and not just giving them the form. So the complaints that should have been filed just weren't filed. I think it's a really good point. Like it should be as easy as possible to,
Yeah.
because police departments they have an interest in addressing that, right? So they should be helping with that in principle, not making it harder.
So a user-friendly
Just that whole
complaint
idea,
process.
because the whole idea of telling an officer is unfounded. We don't just do that. That's not okay. So that underneath the policing model, community policing model that we're working on, it's stagnant to go through because you just don't tell it on a police officer. That just doesn't take you anywhere. So we have to push it as CRB members and as community members who know that. But if it's a bigger, larger language or a discussion we're having, it's okay to do that. You'll still be safe. You'll still be okay. Into something bigger where we're talking about it in a bigger way, that this is the new culture of how community policing or policing is doing in the state. It's okay to file a police report on a police officer. And here's how you do that. That kind of thing.
I was talking about earlier about some way of evaluating. There's another issue. A lot of people of color are moving to what we call the greater Minnesota because of lack of housing. And particularly African Americans who find themselves interracially married or dating in small town Minnesota. You get a lot of harassment not only from citizens but from police officers, to the point where they force them to leave. So, what can, at the state level, because you're not going to get it out of local communities because that's the way the majority of the people in that community, I mean, that's their attitude toward people who are different. And so what can the state do to protect people? Because there's no support system, no lawyers, no organizations, and no institution that support people that find themselves involved with harassment and discrimination in small towns. And to me, I think that's significant enough that there's not even a way for people, except NAACP get complaints, but there's a lot of people don't know where to go. I mean, even from resource officers in the school, all part of that harassment system for kids being harassed and attacked, and when they retaliate, they get written up and find themselves in the criminal justice and there's no support. Nobody come forward and tell the truth about how it started. So my point, I guess the issue that I see is that what kind of support system can the state create for people in that environment? It's Human Rights Department, very difficult for a parent who's struggling with a lot of economic issues, etc., to be able to talk about how can I get a complaint with the Human Rights Department and come in and investigate what's going on in that community. And second, recognizing also, you have no support system that anyone's gonna come forward and testify on their behalf. You understand what I'm saying? So that somebody needs to look at how to do that. How can you make it easy for people to file complaints and get some kind of resolution to the harassment and even like I said, even from officials.
To identify a broader support system for community members who come over for us against conflict.
I guess the only thing, Claudia, that I would add is that actually before this meeting, I had a sit-down meeting with Carl Crawford, who's a local human rights commissioner, executive director here in Duluth, to talk about how we can partner and leverage more of our resources. So I know that it's a concern. When I've been here, you've raised it. You know as well, as relates to the governor's effort, which kind of fell short within the legislature as relates to getting regional offices. That probably will be a conversation we try to have again with the legislature. And as I said, there's a good conversation with Carl, good conversation with Mayor Larson about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And we'll probably be visiting again with all the NAACP chairs and on seeing what changes.
And the area, Duluth has some kind of support, but the range, the western part of the northwestern part of the state, I mean, there's some horrific kinds of incidents that even the NAACP don't have the resources to, to support them adequately. And so, I don't know what the answer is. Some of the complaints I really feel sad for people's situations. I mean, I'm retired, so I can go 100, 150 miles out when I'm, on my time off. And go and just be with people as they go through the process. But most people working can't afford to take off to do that. So.
Right. Okay. We're gonna pause really quickly because we have to change the video, something with the camera. Somebody asked a question regarding the proposed board and what the board was made up of. So, I can't remember who asked that. I think it was, okay. So, is the recommendation that it just needs to be more diversified? Is that like a recommendation you agree with?
Yes, more diverse, more civilians, and the same types of training that's being recommended.
And then I know you also asked what is it made up of right now, so I will let David share who's in that council right now.
On the post board, there's 9 members that are affiliated with law enforcement. There's 3 community members, and then there's also 3 members of higher education and 1 elected official. So one of the members that is a law enforcement is also a higher education person, if that helps answer your question.
Okay.
The post force is that just for people down there in the cities?
No,
Is that all over?
That's what it's.
Okay. Great.
Okay. Anything else that we need to address? Any other issues?
The resource officers, any feedback about that situation? But each district probably got their own policies.
Right.
Are there any standards? I'm concerned about the state. I mean, I understand they don't want to get into managing everybody's stuff, but they could always set standards that people have to meet.
Okay.
You know what I'm trying to say? So here's the standards that you have to meet to do this or to do that. And that's and then allow you to develop your own policy. Each agency develop their own policy to meet that. And then those should be scrutinized to make sure that they're meeting the standard. It's almost like the education standard or whatever. And I know that nationally we have a problem with education standards. We should be able to fine tune them for state.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, in terms of the area we talk about, in terms of law enforcement, we should be able to, because we're getting community input, also community input,
Right.
and a standard, state standard. I just think it'll move
Okay,
us ahead.
that's a great one. So, state standards for school resource officers.
Resource officers. Same thing, the post board. I mean, you got the legislature, someone from the legislature on the post board, someone from education. Is that what I heard?
There's 3 higher education members. The elected official is Kevin Stinson of Lindstrom. That's the only elected official that is on the post board.
And that's some police officer?
Yes. Madaria Arredondo. Let me
Is
see.
that the new police chief?
Yes, that's the new chief of Minneapolis. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. St. Paul police. There's sheriffs. I mean, I'm not gonna go down the whole list, but yes, they're well represented by law enforcement.
So, clear for me, what's the purpose of the post board? I know it was established somewhere, probably back in the 70s, early 80s, maybe even as far back as the 70s. What's the purpose of it?
So, I mean, I can teach you kind of what the board's function is. It's a voting body, and each member has 1 vote. Members are expected to have a working knowledge of state government in general, the board's scope and mission, administrative rules, the board's bylaws and rules of the organizations. Members should strive to maintain the best interests of the citizens of the state in their decision making. So and it's supposed to be representative of the people.
And they also license all the officers, so in order
And
to
that was-
license
that
a
was-
police officer, they license all.
And that was the licensing part is what I thought, that one significant part of that process was training, the training that police officers had to have. I thought the post board set that standard. Am I right or wrong?
You are correct. So when working collectively with the colleges who do the training, the post board doesn't do the training, they set the standards for what police officers should have or shouldn't have as far as training, in addition to licensing the police officers.
So how do we have community? I mean, there's an element that's missing, I guess what I'm saying. Because you got everybody got a vested interest of the community in terms of setting those standards. You know what I'm saying? That the institution have it because these are the educators, as you will. And then you got the police officers, primarily police chiefs who serve on that board. And I'm just saying, where's the community input in that process?
So in your question, what I hear is a recommendation from you and also the other gentleman is to have a more impactful relationship or opportunity for community to participate. Because right now, the higher ed is about, that's who teaches the officers. The officers themselves are on the board, but there's only 3 public member community positions. And if I hear what you're saying correctly, the customer who's served by officers, community, don't really have a voice in this particular structure we have now. So one of the recommendations I hear you're saying is, how do we get more community involved, not only just say on the post board, but how the training is done, how officers are licensed, and that kind of input. So.
Precisely.
Okay, and which was also kind of what you were saying, right? Okay. Okay, what else? We're about 20 minutes before we wrap up. Anything else? Do we feel we've covered a lot? Not enough? We're missing some things? There's also, I also have postcards here, like note cards, in case you want to express a concern, have an input, but you just don't feel comfortable sharing it out loud, you just want to do it in writing, I have no charge that you guys can also put your input in or concerns. If after tonight you're thinking of something else, David, what's the best way to communicate electronically? Is it Facebook?
Yeah, that's one of the options. Or, I mean, if you need a card, I have cards too, if you want to reach out directly.
So there's something that, you go home tonight and you're sitting thinking about this and you're like, you know what, something else that I think should be a part of this. Or you talk to your neighbor and after that conversation something else comes up, let us know. If we want to hear as much as we can before this is finalized. The Facebook page is Governor's Council.
Go to Governor's Council on Law Enforcement.
It's right here. It's right here.
Event on Facebook.
Yeah, it is linked to the event, yeah, exactly. So, and you can do messaging there and leave comments and things like that. Yes?
What happens to the feedback as you travel?
Right. So, next steps on this is we are collecting as much feedback as possible from the office station community members. What we're doing with all this information is we're bringing all of this feedback back to the council, and then the council is then responsible for incorporating as much as it can into the final recommendations of the Board of the Governor. So there are 2 more council meetings, there is 2 more. One on the 12th of September and the other one on the 21st of September. They are open meetings, so the community is welcome to attend and listen. And it is during those meetings that the council is kind of taking all of this information in and, breaking them up into their individual work groups and identifying what needs to go where. So, and then at the end of the month, the council has to present their final recommendations to the governor. So, and then at that point, the governor will kind of decide, what's part of his authority versus part of, legislation, nothing like that.
Where does the
So-
council meet?
Yeah,
Where does the council meet?
I'm sorry, the council is meeting down at the Capitol, and they meet at the governor's boardroom, cabinet room, sorry, which is, I can't remember the room number, actually, but it's basically the governor's cabinet room, down at the Capitol. And the meetings are from 4 to 6, 4 to 7?
The next one, 47.
4 to 7, just because we're coming to the end of it and they're going to have a lot more work to do. So it's 4 to 7 on the 12th, down at the Capitol. And then the one after that is probably on the 21st, also at 4 o'clock, same place. Right, those meetings are also being recorded. So if you cannot attend, but you want to kind of stay in touch as to what's happening at those meetings, they are also being recorded. And they're also being uploaded onto the Facebook page. So anything else that we want to address tonight as it relates to the recommendations, the process, what's next, any other questions that either I can answer or James or David can answer for you guys?
I do have one that I'm trying to tell you where it was in here.
Sure.
And that was about the 20 hours of.
Oh, I think that was in page 5, number 5, I think. Was that it? Was that it?
Right. And so 20 hours, just sometime in their probationary period, you would volunteer and you would just be at a homeless shelter. It wouldn't be, I mean, I would think that there would be like different crisis events. Sexual abuse, domestic abuse, I mean, not just a homeless shelter.
Okay.
I think that I'm sure in some of the training that a police officer goes through, they have training on how to assess and how to read how the person is feeling, so maybe how they should approach it. But, you know, maybe doing volunteering opportunities in those agencies or in those shelters, not just a homeless shelter, might help.
Yeah. And I think what this I think, and you guys can correct me, this is just used as an example, right? As an example, it's like a homeless shelter or a food pantry, not just those areas, but more like, I think this reads more like, these are some of the areas, but not necessarily just limited to these areas.
Well, is there certain experiences or certain, that you're looking for the person to have the experience with, or are you just looking at the officer while he or she is on their probationary period to get to know the community? I guess that's what I'm looking at. What is it that you're looking at them volunteering in? What what knowledge are you trying to have them gain?
So be more specific, you're saying, though, on what it is that the officer needs to be training in?
Right, because I mean,
Okay.
you know, he can go to a school and read to the kids. You know, that's volunteering, but what's he learning?
I guess one other thing to say, this is written as a recommendation from the respective group. It's not to suggest that that's the current status quo.
Okay,
So to that extent, it is a recommendation that is coming forward that law enforcement agencies should do. So that's, I think, why you're getting this question back. If you think that that's important, how I would interpret that as a member is that you like that recommendation and you want the recommendation to be broader and to have other experiences.
Right?
yes,
Does that make
yes.
sense?
And my feedback to that particular paragraph is, I don't see much value in it.
Okay.
I don't see much value in him just volunteering in the shelter or whatever. I mean, I think you get that experience in everyday life if you police in low-income communities. You would, you know what I'm trying to say? I don't think that would bring much value to the process of training. That's what I'm saying. I would look for something much more effective.
Do you have any ideas, any suggestions on what that might look like?
Not off the top of my head. I'm just reacting to this, because I'm trying to say, and I guess the question for maybe the committee can go back as they begin to finalize the report, say what values, you have to take all of this stuff, I guess the comments you're gonna have, and then evaluate themselves. What value does that bring? Of all the recommendations you make, what is that intended to do? And for the amount of work that you put into this process, you know, is that what we're getting out of it? You know, are there some other areas much more important that we need to be addressing with that deals with community police relationship? You know, I just want to share an experience, and I think we have a good relationship with the police here in town. But a couple of weeks ago, a white guy, I got a call to come help this white guy, old guy, I think he's probably approaching 80, driving, he had got stopped driving without a license. Okay, and something happened with his insurance, that his license got suspended, blah, blah, blah. I had someone, I drove his car and had someone follow me after I take him home. And when I stopped to help, because he was handicapped, to get him out of the car, 2 police cars rolled up on me and said, what's going on? You need any help? You need any help? Well, you know, I mean, you have to understand that I'm not satisfied with the fact of why they would roll up on me because the black guy is touching a white man to help a handicapped person get out of the car, and I take 2 police officers. And they roll up like they were ready for bear, whatever it took, you know what I mean? I was intimidated, we both were intimidated by the fact that they showed up. So nobody called them? Oh, or maybe somebody called them, I don't know. Somebody could have passed by and saw them. You know, me assisting them, assuming that I may be trying to rob them, I don't know. Whatever, but, I mean, it happened so fast. Once we started sending them on their way, we didn't stop and think about why did that happen? Okay, and so, and I said that because there's so many issues like that. I mean, had I been indignant, it probably could have been real crazy, you know what I'm saying? A lot of folks would have really been teed off about the fact of what happened. I had a common sense approach, yeah, whatever reason they did it. Now they left me alone, so I'm gonna just go ahead and do what I was doing. But so many people would react to that and say, you did that because I'm black, you know, blah, blah, blah. And one word led to another one, next thing you know, somebody's head gets rolling, you know? And that's what I'm saying. So how then the training, okay, that you roll up like that, what kind of dynamic you create by the way you approach that situation?
Right. And the communication.
Yeah.
You know,
And so to me, working in an area to deal with a situation like that is much more crucial than the fact that you help distribute food to the hunger and clothing or whatever, you know what I'm saying? If you see that happening every day, you can volunteer, do that on your off time, or you can go do it on your own work. I wouldn't give a care about that, but my point is that this whole process to me should look at it a lot deeper than that. That's the only thing I'm saying.
Yep, I agree. Yes, ma'am.
Community events that happen and do happen around the state or not. But we have a group that gets together monthly, just meets and talks about things, and it's a group that is contained, is comprised of homeless people and police and different agencies, and they just talk about what's going on. So that there's a rapport going with everybody involved, and hopefully helps things. But I mean, maybe that could be part of those volunteer hours. There's also, and again, I don't know if it's here or if it's statewide, but we have a social worker who works with the police. And there's people who are specially trained with NAMI for the National Alliance of Mental Illness. And whether or not any of that volunteer hours could be involved right with those crisis situations, so to just help with more training right in the crisis situation.
I think I'll try to make sure I get this down right.
Sorry.
So what she's saying, I think, is an education, not just a volunteer experience, an educational experience for them, say, they do a lot of domestic violence calls. They spend time in a domestic violence shelter. Now they know what it's like to be the woman in that situation. They're beginning to get that exposure. So if it was something where you could get more education, just volunteering, but you're getting an education,
Right.
what it's like to be in that community, what it's like to feel like in this situation.
Right, to help you as the officer maybe have I mean, I know you have to assess every situation, so you can't have a canned response, but to kind of help that officer understand.
Relate,
Yeah.
Right.
humanize their
Relate.
victims.
I would actually change that example and not have food pantry. Have it be something more on point, like working in a domestic violence shelter, or something that's, or a university or educational institution, diversity, such and such. So it's not like it's just working at those hours.
Just to add to that, doing all that work is building relationships, so when Clyde gets stopped, that officer already knows these folks around him because he's already volunteered in these places, got education, got this, got those relationships, and that's what community policing is about, relationships, so that we don't have that situation where, because the police know each other, they know us on the ground already. So it's like, hey, sorry, I didn't mean to stop you, just, I saw you there, blah, blah, blah. That whole thing, volunteering as a police officer in your first period of time of working, builds relationships of who's who in the community so that you know when you're stopping Renee, oh, I don't, oh, what's going on, you know, like that. So it builds your foundation of what you're walking on as a police officer. That relationship piece, it's all about community. It's all about community relationships. It makes it better. That's why community policing is strong here. So just to add to your guys' points, totally with you.
I think it's a great idea too to have in those experiences, but then you also have to be careful with that because women specifically, I guess, who have experienced trauma, typically from men in domestic violence situations, it might be, I don't know, traumatic.
Okay. Perfect. Anything else? Okay, so it's 7:30 or 7:29, looks like. Again, as a reminder, we will bring all this information back to the council. We'll do a summary of what this meeting was about. We are recording the meeting, it will be uploaded. You're certainly welcome to kind of take a look at this or other meetings. And then the council kind of starts really digging into revising their preliminary recommendations until final time. So with that, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your input. It's extremely important to hear from as many of you as possible. And like I said, if you guys have anything that comes up down the road, don't hesitate to reach out to us via Facebook, or David has cards that he can share his information with you in case you need to get a hold of him. So other than that, anything else, Shane?
I echo what Ruben said. Thank you for your time and attention, and this is important work, and we couldn't do it without you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Did you guys address body cameras before I got here?
We did not talk about, not tonight. So,
Because, and I know there was a large push to not allow officers to review information from body camera before they write the report. And I guess I see the value and I see the positive and the negative of it. Because part of the deal is, I mean, we believe reports have been fabricated, blatantly fabricated in the past. And one of the reasons we advocated for body cameras, and we know that a lot of people come on board, both police chiefs and police officers come on board to have them. But I don't know. I still question whether they should have access to it. So, before they do their report, understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If I'm gonna write my report based on that, I get a chance to see what was recorded and what wasn't recorded.
Right.
Okay, and so if something wasn't recorded, I could fabricate along those lines. If I don't know what's recorded, then I'll just have to tell the truth, because people will know when I'm lying when they compare the body camera with my statements. Understand what I'm saying? I mean, there's a value in it, but then there's a negative in it.
So is your recommendation that those departments that do use body cameras, that there's something in place so that officers cannot review the video pre-writing their report?
Right.
That's the recommendation.
Right.
Okay.
And the other one is, good grief, my brain is coming on now, I'm sorry about that. The other one is that when to turn the body cameras on.
When to turn them on. Okay.
Right, and then I know there's been concern about in domestic situations where you go into people's home or where people may be indecent
Right.
or exposed. Since body cameras may become public information,
Right.
do we want body cameras to share, expose our personal information to the public? And so that issue about turning them on and who can residents request it to be turned off? I'm just saying, when they feel intimidated by them, or how can I say this? When they feel exposed, if it's necessary for the investigation, that's one thing, but it's just incidental. That's what I'm saying. Another one is just walking in my house for any particular situation with a body camera on, expose, do I give up my privacy? That's what I'm saying. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think that is an area that's worth review, is what happened in those situations. And I think some recommendations should come from this council as to how that should be handled. I don't think I don't think the council should be mute on that issue. That's the only thing.
Thank you.
Could I ask a follow-up question to that? So one of it could be stating what the current state of the law is. And then one could be developing recommendations to what the law should be. I'm curious as it relates to your recommendation, is it the first, is it the second, or is it both? So for example, I think if we were to ask an attorney as it relates to if the police officer has the body camera on and there has been an invitation to have the officer step onto the property premises, they probably could give you a answer as it relates to whether that data would be subject to the Government Data Practices Act. I'm not saying that local law enforcement throughout the state is in communication with the public. So, for example, would your recommendation be is that the county attorney or / law enforcement educate the public on that issue?
I guess my feeling would be that the subject would have some input in terms of whether certain information as it relates to their privacy would be made public. So that they be given an opportunity to review the information, and where it's not generic to the incident, that it not be made public. That's what I'm saying.
So just as one member of the council, what I would hear you saying is that there should be some discussion with the public first to understand what the current state of the law is. And there should be some type of dialogue as relates to whether that should continue to be a standard.
Okay. I think that's.
Can I
I'm okay
add
with it.
to your comment? So if you're saying that certain things should be kept and certain things shouldn't, then you're involved with altering that camera or altering that tape, which could create issues also. And then questioning whether or not it should be turned off if it's just an incidental situation. Well, I think that's the purpose of the cameras. I mean, I don't think I don't know if they expect it to escalate to a different situation or not, but I think that's the purpose of the cameras, is to have it on there so that when or if it does, the information's available. Sorry, just
I'll weigh in sort of what I hear you saying is that there should be consistency as it relates to the standard practices and policies concerning the use of body cameras. And to the extent that there's a deviation from the standard custom and practices, that there should be clarity as it relates to what the consequences for violating such policies or practices.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Hey,